I'm Sostine. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to talk about how to make embroidered buttons for your court suit. You see them all over court suits. They're on the front, along the line, they're on the cuffs, they're on the back, they're on the waistcoat, the breeches. There even are 3 buttons under the pocket flap, which really add a lot of charm. The way that they were made back in the past is that on an embroidered panel such as the one you see here, people would embroider the buttons along the edges. They would come in 2 sizes, larger and smaller for the breeches. Now what I do is I do this electronically by digitizing. So let's talk a little bit about digitizing. The emphasis on the word little because I do plan on making a whole series of how to digitize later, and this is just a little introduction. So first off, I start by loading up the image of the button and sizing it appropriately on the screen in the program. The program I'm using here is PE Design 10. I hear that there are others that work really well. This is the one I personally just got because it happened to come with my machine for a reduced price. The reduced price was still several $100s. These digitizing programs are not cheap. And so what I do is I start by drawing the outline of the button first. I do it here in white, just so I could be similar to the original. I actually use a zigzag stitch at about 140 stitches per inch density, and I make it a perfect circle. The original is probably not a perfect circle because it's at an angle, but here you can see me doing that. I then use a line tool to draw each individual stitch of the little petals along the edges. Initially I do it one at a time, but if you're someone who doesn't have a good cutting tool on your machine, you may want to just attach the edges along the border of the button that will be covered anyway, and then do it that way. Afterwards, I draw the individual pink petals of the flower by using an outline tool and using a satin stitch to fill it in. I use the light pink for the edges, for the outside petals, and a little red one for the inside. And that, of course, draws it in. I usually use about 140 stitches per inch as well for this, just because I find that works the best with the weight of thread I use. You may want to go up if you use a thinner thread and go down if you use a thicker thread. So after I do this, you can see it actually come together in the final image here. I actually make my buttons a little larger than the original. The original button is 1 1/8 inch across. I usually will go a little higher up, about 1.3 inches. And that actually accounts for the dome shape of the buttons as well as a natural shrinkage of machine embroidery. I then put it on a sheet so that I could print multiple buttons at once. Here you can see 9 buttons on one page. Once I am done digitizing buttons, it's time to embroider these buttons. I will hoop the frame with the fabric really taut. I use a tearaway interfacing so that I can just rip it all off at the end and have very little interfacing everywhere else. Then I start embroidering. I'm using Terraced silk thread, and I won't go into that too much here since I go into it elsewhere, and you can see it embroider. Now it's time to make the buttons. To start, I go and measure the distance about halfway away from the diameter of the button away from the edge. I actually make it about a little less than halfway, about 40%. Then I do a large running stitch with about 1/4 inch stitches and go all the way around. Yes, I'm using a thimble. And then once I go all the way to the start. I drop the needle, and using embroidery shears, I very carefully cut out the button. And I'm very careful not to cut off the thread. Here you can see my button shank. It is a wooden button mold, M-O-U-L-D, that I get from Burnley and Trowbridge. I prefer wood since it has higher friction than bone, but use whatever you like. I make sure to put it in with the dome space facing outwards towards the design. After pulling it in like a drawstring bag, I go from one edge to the other, and I do go around about 12 times back and forth, changing my angle every single time until I get to my starting point again. Finally, I put a knot and finish it off. To utilize these buttons, I use a polyester upholstery weight thread, thread it the needle, and just simply sew through the back fabric portion of the button. You will not be going through, but sewing onto the back of the fabric where you've already sewn the buttons actually does a very good job holding the button down. And there you have it, 18th century buttons. Please note you will be making a lot of buttons. I personally use about 22 to 26 buttons on every frock coat, another 10 for the waistcoat, another 7 for the breeches, with another 8 for the breeches legs. Get ready to make a lot of buttons, and happy buttoning, guys. See you next time. Please subscribe if you want to see more of the frock coat.